Thank you, Andrew, and welcome to us. Thank you for joining us. So
You're welcome.
Andrew is going to be talking to us about weight loss before hernia surgery. It's a subject that is important to us all, and I don't think a lot of the time that we fully understand why it is so important. So the aim of tonight's session is to give us the information about why it is so important, and to maybe talk about some practical steps that we can take to help us on this journey. So I think Andrew's got a short presentation to give us, and then we can move to some questions if anybody has them.
I can start off by sharing my screen, because that's kind of the title of where we're going. And I think, can you all see the screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's something we've picked up on the patient chat. It's something we've picked up just in general, is that many people with a hernia facing hernia repair have been asked to lose weight. And that's kind of been the sum and total of the information given. Go away and lose some weight. And when you've lost some weight, come back and we'll think about an operation. And I think understanding a little bit why weight loss may be useful will give some motivation. And then we can talk a little bit about how to lose weight, which I think we have to say from the outset is not an easy thing to do. But we'll come to that when we have the discussion. Now, obviously, hernia repair, like any operation, involves a lot of rights. As you can see from there, it's the right operation on the right patient at the right time, obviously by the right team. So people who are experienced in what they're doing, you've got to do the operation right, and you have to look after the patient right afterwards. So there's a lot of things there to get right. And we're probably talking a little bit about at the right time. So when a patient who is overweight, who is coming for hernia surgery, has managed to lose some weight and at the same time improve their fitness, then that is the right time to do the surgery. So why lose weight before hernia surgery? And one of the things that healthcare professionals, so that's right across the board, doctors, nurses, dietitians, physios, we are being asked as a public health message to encourage people who are overweight to think about their weight and think about, do they wish to lose weight? Because in general, being significantly overweight is not good for your health. When you're young, there may be nothing wrong with your health apart from being overweight. But with time, there are a number of diseases that are related or are more common in people who are overweight. So we know that diabetes is related to being overweight. We know thin people can become diabetic, but in general, diabetes comes in a younger age in people who are overweight. So that's part of the reason is a public health message. But then if we start to look at the surgery itself, these are the sort of common conditions that people have who are significantly overweight. Their blood pressure is likely to be up. They may well have diabetes or a pre-diabetic state. And diabetes is abnormal sugar metabolism. That means that your blood sugar is higher than it should be. And the reason that we don't like high blood sugar is because it damages blood vessels, but also bacteria like the sugar to cause infections, things like sleep apnea and what have you. And all these things make surgery more risky for patients who have these conditions. And particular wound infections and wound problems is a common outcome of major surgery. And it's a common cause of a hernia repair to fail. It's the starting process. So trying to do what we can to minimize the risk of wound infection, wound problems, postoperative chest infections, that kind of thing, stopping you coughing a lot in the early postoperative period will help the repair last, hopefully, your lifetime. And another general risk, generally being overweight, it's harder to have an anesthetic. If you can't see the veins on the back of your hand, it's hard to get the cannula in. It's hard to get needles into your back if you're having spinal or what's called epidurals, which are interventions to help with postoperative pain. And most people who have a hernia operation will end up having a breathing tube inserted into their windpipe as they go off to sleep. And again, people who are significantly overweight, it's much harder to intubate these people with the risk that they might not get the tube in safely and the risks attached to that. Many patients are frightened about going off to sleep. They're frightened about waking up halfway through the operation, and they're worried about not waking up at the end. And being overweight does make it a little bit harder for you to go off to sleep. and a little bit harder for you to wake up. And that's because a lot of the drugs that the anaesthetists use are fat soluble. In other words, they move into fatty tissues. So you often need more of the drug to put you to sleep. While you are asleep, there's more and more of the drug building up in your fat stores. When we stop giving the drug at the end of the operation, you still have a lot of anesthetic on board, so you remain sleepy for longer. And that can have problems if you don't breathe properly, that kind of thing. So those are the general reasons in general about public health, about diseases, difficulty with an anesthetic that make losing some weight beneficial. And if you look at then at the hernia itself, we do a lot of hernia surgery by keyhole surgery. There are benefits to the patient, less acute pain, generally back up on your feet more quickly. But patients who are significantly overweight, it can be more difficult to do keyhole surgery. Just physically getting the little ports into the abdomen, being able to move tissues around, the forces on those ports as they move a lot more tissue around can make it difficult. I've already mentioned chest infections, and I'll come back to this, but having a lot of fat inside your abdomen, when you squash it in when you repair the hernia, that presses on the diaphragm, making it harder for you to breathe. And as you're all aware, breathing is clearly an essential part of life. And for anyone who unfortunately has a hernia and is going for surgery, you want it to be your once-in-a-lifetime operation. You want it repaired and you want it to last for the rest of your life. And unfortunately, being significantly overweight is a risk factor for your hernia to come back before your days are finished. So you will end up having potentially more repairs. So there are good reasons to try and lose weight. As I mentioned, a lot of patients who have hernia surgery, particularly open surgery, have wound infections, wound breakdown, and patients who are overweight, it's more likely. And this is a bit of a disaster. You know, you can see the patient is a bit on the heavy side. They've got wound breakdown, they've got a mesh visible under the skin, and this is all a bit of a nightmare to get healed. And indeed, it may not heal by itself without actually physically taking that mesh out. And for many patients, when the mesh comes out, you're back to square one and your hernia's back. So that's a potential problem. Now, loss of domain is a technical term, but if we walk through this over the next few slides, this is a caricature of your abdomen. The solid black line is your good abdominal wall. Your spine's at the back with your back muscles. And this is the hernia, the gap between the healthy tissues. So when we repair the hernia, ideally, you want to bring the two blue arrowed points back together again. Now, if the abdominal wall is quite stretchy, then that will be relatively easy and you will keep the same circumference of the abdominal cavity. But often it's not, and you end up in this sort of situation where the abdominal wall is not that stretchy. You're bringing it together under tension with the knots here. And this is the volume of tissue which you kind of have to squash back into this. So it makes it harder to breathe, it puts more tension on the repair, and it's more likely to break down. And if we just have a look at that pictorially, just to demonstrate this. So there's a gentleman who's been in the wars, he's got a big incisional hernia, an open abdomen that healed. And let's have a look at his CT scan. Now, you may not be used to looking at CT scans, but you look at them as if you are standing at the feet of the patient looking up. These are the kidneys, here's the spine, here's the abdominal wall, and this is the hernia over here. This is the gap. Now, all this black tissue, very black tissue around the kidney and in amongst the bowels is fat. That's all it is. It has no purpose really apart from being there. There's obviously fat between the muscles and the skin. That white line is the skin, but this is the bit that's the problem. If a patient can lose weight, get rid of a lot of this black space, you buy volume, which allows you to bring the abdomen back together more easily, less tension, less pressure on the diaphragm, and it's more likely to produce a lasting repair. And weight loss, yes, you will lose some subcutaneous fat, but the key bit is what we call visceral fat. Visceral fat is the fat around the kidneys, around the blood vessels to the bowel, that you see all these black spaces. And you can see in this poor gentleman, at least 50% of his abdominal volume is fat. And losing some weight will reduce the visceral fat and will buy us space. Now, I often tell my patients around this is that when you're trying to close the abdomen and push all the abdominal contents back inside out of the hernia, it's a bit like trying to put a sleeping bag back into the sack. And for many of you that have used more modern sleeping bags, it's often quite a challenge. As you can see, there's a lot of stuffing involved, and then eventually you concertina it down. And the analogy here is, do you make the sleeping bag smaller, or can you make the sack bigger? And really, the only way to make the sleeping bag smaller in a sense is by weight loss. Removing that black area that I showed you in the CT scan is a good way of making the sleeping bag smaller in a sense that you're stuffing back into the sac, which is the abdominal wall. The surgeon can chop bits of you out to create space, but when you remove bits of bowel, for example, you have to do a join. It makes what should be a clean operation, what we call clean contaminated, and then it increases the risk of infection, and you're now potentially into a difficult post-operative recovery. So this is possible, but it's not a great option. And this is the key bit. Bowel prep is something that we don't do very much, trying to get as much poo out of the colon. There are benefits and downsides to that. And obviously making the sac bigger, well, those are the things that the surgeon can do. And I don't really plan to discuss that any further because it's off the topic of this evening. So the why? Well, there's lots of reasons, but the bottom line is it makes the operation safer for the patient. It makes them easier to recover from getting out of bed, moving, rolling over, and it makes you more likely to do well in the short term, so less risk of infection, less risk of postoperative chest infections, that kind of thing. And then in the long term, a hernia repair, which lasts you your lifetime. So, Jackie, I don't know whether you have any questions at this point where we just pause before we go on to the how of weight loss. Anything I said there need a little bit more explanation?
I don't think anybody, I think that's a really good explanation. It's something that has been lacking. And although we're often told to lose weight, we've never been told the theory of why. So I think that's quite interesting there, and it really will help people. So I think if we go on to the weight loss now, and then maybe how we can lose weight, maybe we'll have some questions after that. I have some questions here that relate
I'll keep
to
going then.
How.
I'll keep going. Well, I think one of the things that we forget when it comes to weight loss is what are the drivers that allow us to become overweight. And we talk about an unhealthy diet. Now, that can be eating the wrong thing, but it can also just be eating too much of the right thing. I'll talk a little bit about exercise, but we often think, well, exercise is not going to the gym, it's not jogging, it's not buying a bike. We should really talk about it as movement. Just instead of driving the 100 yards, walk them if we can. But we'll come back to some of the difficulties hernia patients may have around that. We know that if you're a poor sleeper, you'll tend to gain more weight. If you're stressed, disrupted daily patterns, that can be difficult if you're a night shift worker or every day doesn't have any routine. You have young children that keep you up at night, or you have elderly relatives that keep you up at night. And we mustn't forget, too, that sometimes we are responsible for patients' weight gain. Some drugs, unfortunately, make it more likely to gain weight. Steroids are the obvious example. Antihistamines are a relatively common drug people take for hay fever, that kind of thing. They often have a slight appetite stimulant. So there's some of the drugs that you may be on may not be the best, and sometimes it can be worthwhile discussing with your GP, are there alternatives that may be, so it's putting weight loss into that package. It can be difficult to sort out your whole life if you're stressed, you're sleep deprived, problems at home with young children, whatever, but it's all part of the package of thinking about weight loss. I think surgeons sometimes come a bit negative. They come across with a message, patient's too big, go away, and they sort of are despondent because the hernia is causing them bother and they want something done. So it's important to have positivity and support. That could be family, could be friends, but try and surround yourself with people that are encouraging rather than judgmental, and we're guilty of that at times. Planning meals, it's very easy to have a house well stocked and you graze rather than having regulated meals. When you're hungry, you'll tend to order more food than when you order food online than when you've just eaten. So it's trying to focus on food planning. Portion control for many is a problem. Some of that comes from our childhood. You can't leave the table until you finish what's on your plate. There's 2 spoons left in the saucepan. Who's going to finish them up? But it's learning to either put food in the fridge if it's possible, or indeed the freezer for another day. And I know it goes against the grain a little bit, but sometimes it's better to throw it in the bin rather than to eat it. Eating off a smaller plate can help. Buying more expensive ingredients so you can't afford as much may help. And I sometimes do that in restaurants. If you're going to order a steak, you'll get a big meal. If you order the scallops, you're going to get a small meal. So it's choosing, particularly when you're out, the options that might have less calories in them. Regular eating is important. Modern life is quite complicated. We eat a lot on the run, and I'll come back to that. But it's trying to set meal times, trying to have a structure in your day so that you're prevented from snacking either before or after a meal. One of the interesting things about our body is when we are hungry, we don't have good thirst receptors. So when we're thirsty, our body can tell us we're hungry. And sometimes drinking first, and probably the best liquid to drink is water. And if you drink first, wait 20 minutes. And if you're no longer hungry, well, you were thirsty. If you're still hungry, then you probably are hungry, and then have your regular meal time. We're all guilty of eating in front of the TV, eating in the car, eating on the run. And that's not good in general. We tend to eat more when we're distracted. So to a certain extent, eat against the clock, sit down. If you haven't finished your meal by 20 minutes, don't eat anything more. And please try and avoid eating in front of the TV while you're busy working. We've all done it, studying, eating biscuits, and suddenly I found that I've eaten the last biscuits. I've got through the whole packet. So that's just because we're focusing on something else and not focusing on what we're consuming. Now, there's no particular foodstuffs to avoid, really. I'm a fan of food, a fan of eating, and I think we all should be able to eat pretty much anything, but it's portion control, it's important. But losing weight, many of us eat too much in the way of carbohydrates. And carbohydrates are often called the beige foods. It's your bread, rice, pasta. It's sadly any vegetable that grows below the ground. Potatoes are the obvious one, but carrots, parsnips, sweet potato, they all grow below the ground. They're all carbohydrate stores, whether that's a starch end like potatoes, where it's more sugary like carrots. So be careful with vegetables that grow below the ground, because they are actually carbohydrates. And obviously there's sugars in fruits, although they don't seem to be quite as bad in general as refined sugar. And then all the pulses like lentils, nuts and what have you, they can, rice, lentils, split peas, beans, they're all strong carbohydrate sources as well. So you can see it's a kind of the beige foods, and cutting those out, and that includes most things wrapped in plastic, crisps, sweeties and what have you. And it also includes alcohol. Alcohol we metabolize basically as if we've had sugar or starch. So those are things to be careful with, but they are part of a balanced diet, and we do need some. When we make pasta, we make a big bowl of pasta with a little bit of sauce. We should actually have a little bit of pasta and perhaps more of the sauce. And as I've mentioned, avoid ready meals and snacks. They tend to be what we call high-calorie, low-volume foods. And they're tasty, they're nice to have. I'm sure you can have them from time to time, but as a regular form of eating, they are to be avoided. Obviously, as you start to lose weight, you need to celebrate or kind of sense of reward yourself, whether that's a manicure, trip to a massage, whether it's whatever. Try and set milestones, achievable milestones, and celebrate them as you hit them. As I said, I'm a fan of food. if you deny yourself anything, life becomes a struggle. So the odd piece of cake or biscuit or fancy food is something that you do need to have from time to time. We'll have our bad days. Don't give up. You just have to reset the clock and say, I didn't do well today. Let's try again tomorrow and keep going. And hopefully believe in yourself, and hopefully the others round about you will believe in you and also be helpful. If you live in a house with feeders, that's a problem. So they need educated as well as to what food to prepare and portion size, that kind of thing. Exercise, I'm not going to say too much about exercise. Again, I'll reiterate, I'm not saying join the gym or what have you, but walking is probably the best exercise. Again, if your hernia is causing you discomfort with walking, then support garments may help. Sometimes they rub, sometimes they're sweaty and they're not the most comfortable. And if movement is difficult, then there's a variety of, shall we call them, armchair exercises, even watching the TV, having some weights in your arms and lifting them, moving. Water-based exercises, obviously your local swimming pool, although I can understand some of the cosmetic deformities of hernias and it can be embarrassing going to a public place to exercise. And I put there personal trainer, and I put it in italics in a sense, because I'm not saying spend money on a personal trainer, but exercising with other people, you're more likely to walk a bit further if there's someone with you. If you're a little bit unsteady on your feet and are nervous, if there's someone there just to help you if you fall over, or indeed call for help to give you support. So that's where the personal trainer is. It's not investing a lot of money in a sports physiologist, but it's someone to help you achieve your goals, and perhaps to remind you that it's time to move. And I think the key really is moving more. But the caveat to that, and I say this with my bariatric surgery head, we are very efficient machines. And, you know, those of you who go to the gym, you might do a 20 or 30-minute jog, and it registers 200 calories, and you go away and have an almond croissant with your coffee, and that's 300 calories. So we are very efficient machines. We don't burn off calories by exercise particularly well. Some people do, but most people with a hernia will struggle to do the level of activity that you need to do to burn off calories by exercise. So controlling intake, so going back to the diet side of things, what you eat, how you eat, when you eat, is more important than trying to say, well, I can't exercise, therefore I can't lose weight. It's controlling intake. That's the key. So we're getting close to the end. It's not easy. We know that from evidence. It's a little bit easier to lose weight than to keep it off. But the key here is to lose weight for your surgery. And we accept there may be some weight gain afterwards, but that's less of a problem because it'll be a gradual thing. If you are eating less, and particularly if you're a slightly fussy eater, consider adding in some multivitamins. Multivitamins are chemicals that the body cannot make. We have to absorb it from the food we eat. So considering some multivitamin supplements would have things like vitamin C and what have you, which are important for wound healing. And protein is something that, again, tends to be expensive, not always, but it tends to be a bit more expensive, but focusing a bit more on protein to fill you up. There are protein snacks. A lot of them are based around meat, unfortunately. Things like beef jerky are a useful alternative snack. Be careful of what we call protein high energy bars, because they are high and they have a bit more protein, but they have, unfortunately, a lot of sugar in them. And what do we mean by protein? Well, the obvious thing is meat and fish, but it includes dairy products, eggs, and then going back to the beans, the nuts, the pulses, and obviously dairy products all contain a bit more protein. So looking at a diet with more of these sort of things in it and trying to minimize carbohydrate may be of benefit. And as I said, exercise isn't particularly good, but exercise is good for your heart and lungs. So moving in whatever way you can to try and what we call stress the cardiovascular system, make you breathe a bit more, push the heart a little bit, because the body responds to exercise. So the blood supply to your heart will improve, the lungs get better at working. by that movement. And for those of you who watch this and are heading towards hernia surgery, that combination of working on weight, working on fitness, you can, this lady is clearly slimmed down somewhat. You can take what is a pretty horrendous way of getting through life with an ulcerated hernia down to the poor lady's knees, and you can give them their life back. It's a team effort. And I remember at the start, there were all those rights, and we do need our patients to help us do our job and achieve a good outcome. So that really wraps up my talk. I went through it quite quickly, a lot to share there, but I guess there's lots of questions.
There are. Thank you, Andrew. That was really, really interesting. I found that really fascinating. So as a surgeon, you talk a lot about BMIs. And I'm always being asked, what is the BMI that patients need to achieve for a weight loss?
Yeah, so a BMI it's a calculated format. Now we use BMI a lot, although, and for your average person, it's quite a good calculator of your weight, and it's a relationship between your weight and your height. If you look, the Rugby World Cup's on just now, and all those rugby players have a BMI, or certainly the front row forwards have a BMI of around 45, 50. But they are pretty much mostly muscle. So it's not a great thing right across the population. But for more humans like us, it's quite a good discriminator. Now, some surgeons say they won't operate until you reach a particular BMI. And that's often taken as a cutoff of 35. I'm not quite sure where that number came from, apart from certainly in the UK, it's a useful way to ration healthcare. For me, I'm looking at a change in weight. So if your BMI is 50, I might do some calculations around the size of your hernia, how much I've got to push back in, how much more space I need, and I might suggest I need you to get down to a BMI of 40. Now, that's still significantly overweight, but I have bought some extra space. I've made the sleeping bag smaller to get the hernia repaired. So you will meet both, some who give you an arbitrary number, and others who I think are more pragmatic will ask you to get somewhere. Because anyone facing hernia surgery, even if your BMI is, say, 32, which is sort of on the overweight scale, getting your BMI down to maybe 28 will make the surgery a little bit easier too. So it's not just focusing on obesity, it also includes people who are a little bit on the heavy side. One of the hardest hernias to repair is someone who has a normal BMI, a big hernia, and they don't have any weight to lose to buy some space. So actually, if you are a little bit on the heavy side, that is a useful start because you can lose some weight and help your surgeon get all your insides back in.
Thank you. So our next question is, can diet affect the hernia? People often ask that, is what they're eating, does it exacerbate their symptoms? And I think there are some foods that are more inflammatory than others, aren't there?
Yeah. I would hope in general that healthy eating would improve bowel function. We know that some of the carbohydrates that clearly come in oats, bread, that kind of thing, when they are digested by the body, sometimes we don't digest them particularly well, but the bacteria in our colon digest it for us. And the byproduct of that is gas. So you're a bit more windy, both up the way and down the way. And some of you who have irritable bowel syndrome may have heard of the FODMAP diet. And part of the FODMAP diet is trying to avoid foods which bugs in our bowel will digest, ferment, and produce a lot of gas. And obviously, if you tend to be a bit constipated, you're relying on fiber to keep your bowels going. And if you have a higher protein diet, you tend to have less fiber, so you may get a little bit constipated. Obviously, as you lose weight, you might notice there's a change in shape of your abdomen. The hernia that stuck out may start to droop down. So your clothes may not fit quite the same. You may actually, as your hernia descends down around your waistline, you may actually find, even though you're losing weight, your belt size increases, and you think this doesn't make sense. But yeah, Obviously, foods upset you. It is trial and error. And that's why, I can't really give one single diet. People have to experiment that works well for them.
So I have a question here. Iona, you have a question.
Yeah, hi there.
Hi.
Nice to see you. Andrew, congratulations for
Yep.
this and also the initiative of informing all the patients. I don't have exactly a question. I would like just to mention something that I see as a surgeon in my clinics. I see patients that are obese and they want a hernia repair, that they have a very large hernia. However, they have some comorbidities, or they don't really know why they put on weight. I know that most of the times the increased weight is from increased calorie intake, but sometimes there are some other pathologies that are hidden and the patient is not aware of, like for example endocrinology problems, like hypothyroidism, and the patient needs to take some medication for that. So I think the modern way of assessing those patients is to have a multidisciplinary team meeting and have a decision about how to manage those patients well. Most of the patients that are coming to my clinic, they like to have their hernia repair, but they come straight to surgeon to address their hernia when they have other problems that need to be addressed first. And I think the primary care level should be more advanced and more well organized to accept those patients, rather than sending those patients straight to the big hospital for a hernia repair. So it is not, as you said, a simple problem. It's a problem that a big patient with a big hernia maybe has other big problems in the background that need to be sorted out first.
I think that's true. You can sort of pick that up and patients will identify it too. Many of our patients will be overweight, and they have been overweight and steadily overweight for a period of time. You worry more about someone who's gaining a stone every year, particularly if it's recent onset obesity. Then you start to think about hypothyroidism. Unfortunately, a lot of patients who end up with incisional hernias have inflammatory bowel disease, so they may have courses of steroids. Obviously, medication's becoming more topical now rather than taking oral steroids. So sometimes the management of conditions fight against them. And we know, for example, that people who are diabetic, for the same calorie reduction, so they're eating the same amount less per day, they lose weight more slowly than people who are not diabetic. So again, once you've got diabetes, that's your body wants to hang on to the weight that you are. So it's a harder job for them too. But as you know, improving their diabetic control often involves losing weight. And it can be a balance, because we want good diabetic control, but we know that some of the more modern diabetic medications tend to put weight on. And if you have very tight glycemic control, so your blood sugars are sort of sitting the lower end of normal, that in itself is a drive to eat. So you can get a cycle where your blood sugar goes up, you get some treatment, it goes down, you eat, that puts the blood sugar up, you get some treatment, it goes down, you feel hungry and you eat, and you're in that horrible vicious cycle. So I think, again, I can only really speak for the NHS, but we have not been good at managing patients like this who have time, so they're having elective surgery, have time to lose weight. We kind of ask them to go away and let us know when they've lost weight, but perhaps more managed pathway would be better, where we can keep in touch with them, encourage them to keep going, and then slot them in a timely manner when they've achieved their weight goals.
Do you think it's something that you surgeons can do in partnership with the GP? Because the GPs often have access to the health referral schemes, don't they? That a lot of the local councils, especially in the UK, run. Like I've spoke to this team at Barnsley this afternoon about the Eat Well scheme, where they give them 12 weeks structured exercise and diet advice.
I think abdominal wall repair and hernia surgery is the orphan of surgical specialties, but that's changing. Most of the cancer services have quite a big team working with them, specialist nurses, dietitians where necessary, stoma nurses and what have you. And those are the people that patients are more likely to have regular contact with. And then with electronic records, there's the ability to record weights on a regular basis and feed back to the surgical team how things are going. And often at the end of the day, in my practice, it was largely down to my secretary phoning the patients on the list on a regular basis, having a little chat with them in general. How are they getting on? Any new illnesses to tell us about? Oh, and by the way, how's the weight loss going? As a reminder. So I think we do need a team, and I think patients respond to being part of a team. Most athletes train with a coach, and team sports are more fun than solitary sports. So it's turning it into a team event. I know from other countries, I know we were in Prague last week, Jackie, at a EHS event, and one of our colleagues there has set up a prehabilitation group where a lot of patients have they come together and exercise together in a very controlled manner. And quite a few of our patients who were planning hernia repair actually felt as they lost weight, their hernia gave them less bother. They weren't too bothered about the cosmesis. And they actually said, we don't want an operation anymore because quality of life wise, we're now doing all that we wanted to do. We thought it was the hernia stopping us doing things, but it was our weight and our hernia stopping things. So we can also prevent people having surgery, not because we want to stop people having surgery, but surgery is a risky sport. There are risks to surgery. So if you can manage well without it, then sometimes delaying surgery or avoiding it is good for people. I'm a wimp. Wouldn't want an operation. If I could get a bit fitter and keep my hernia, I'll keep going.
Yeah, keep
Not
going.
the right thing to say as a hernia surgeon, but I'm a wimp.
Okay, what's your impression about the new Ozempic drugs, the weight loss drugs? What do you think about those?
Yeah, I think they will start to have a greater role. I was at a conference recently, and there's a lot more drugs coming on the market now. Currently, they're expensive and they're in short supply, so they are being rationed in many countries right across Europe just because the supply of the drugs. What I don't want to do is medicalize being overweight. I think a patient, and that includes me, I'll be a patient one day. We have to take a certain responsibility for ourselves to do things and not just say, well, can you give me a pill? Can I have an injection and I'll be all right? Because pills and injections don't make us fitter. So it's also part of that losing weight, cardiovascular fitness. They're all tied in there together. So yes, new things will come, but I think there's still a big onus on the patient and their support group and the support team to lose weight.
Okay. So Rosemary is saying, Andrew, what is your take regarding underlying health issues that mean weight loss is actually not good for a patient?
Well, there are very few conditions where weight loss is bad for a patient. Obviously, if a patient is thin to start with, losing more weight is not a good plan. Some of the diets can be harmful if you have particular conditions. So, for example, if your kidneys are not working very well, having a low carbohydrate, high protein diet means that the kidneys struggle to deal with the protein, the excess protein, and they just add to the problems of the kidney disease. So,
okay, so
remember
she has cystic fibrosis, to interrupt you there, sorry.
Say again?
So she has cystic fibrosis.
And what's the issue with, I'm sorry, I don't quite understand the problem with weight loss and cystic fibrosis. There will be some, it's always a balance. And it may be that if, for example, whatever the condition is, that they shouldn't lose weight for whatever reason, then you have to weigh up the risks of operating with their current weight versus weight loss, accepting the increased risks. And one of the difficulties that doctors have is that balance. You know, it was a classic story with smokers. Smokers say, well, I've paid so much tax, I can carry on smoking and the government should treat me. And it's very, very difficult when you get into those sort of arguments, and I'm not a health economist to say them, but we do have an issue that we have a responsibility to do the best for an individual patient. But if, for example, we know that patients who are overweight are more likely to get wound infections can be very costly to treat. And in a health system in the UK and in many parts of Europe, where there's a limited amount of money, what I spend on one patient, I can't spend on another patient. And that's one of the difficulties that we grapple with every day. We want to do the best for every patient, but we can't afford to do that. And that's why sometimes we need patients to make changes so that they become less expensive to treat. That may sound harsh, but it's kind of what we do in our household. We don't buy everything we want. We make the decisions what we'll buy and what we won't buy. And unfortunately, that's how health systems have to run as well.
Okay. So Rosemary just said then that a dietitian has told her not to lose too much weight, but she would like to, so she would take any advice she could get.
Yeah, again, I don't quite understand that question. One of the issues which I forgot to mention, I think, is crash dieting. So, you know, a lot of you could say, well, I need to lose, for example, I've been told I have to lose 2 stone. Well, you can lose 2 stone quite quickly if you go on a starvation diet and drink. But what will tend to happen in that situation is you break down the protein of your muscles for essential activities. You will lose some fat for sure, but you break down protein and therefore you become less fit, because you need protein in muscles to breathe. Your heart is a big bag of protein. So losing weight quickly is generally a bad way to lose weight. So you can lose weight too fast. And we see that in bariatric surgery. Some people actually have an operation to help them with their weight, and then we start artificially feeding them because they're losing weight too fast, and that's harmful to your body.
I think the answer there, Rosemary, is to talk to your dietitian and maybe work out a diet that is going to lose weight gradually and allow you to become fitter and not cause a problem with your illness. Okay, so another question I have is, for ladies of a certain age, around the menopause age, hormones can have a big effect on weight gain, can't we?
Yeah.
How can we get around that?
Yeah, I have no easy answer for that. Unfortunately, hormones will. HRT can have an effect on weight as well. So that's a tricky one. And obviously, the symptoms of the menopause, if you're taking the treatment to try and minimize them, it's again that balance. But it's not easy. I have no easy answer for that, but it's all part of the equation. The bottom line, though, is, and again, this may come across a little bit harsh, and I don't mean it to, but we all are designed to be a particular weight by our genes. So about 70 to 80% of our weight is what we are genetically born with, but life can influence that. So we all end up different sizes, but when we go into an area where we're calorie restricted, we will lose weight. And the classic of that were, you know, some of the horrors of the Second World War, of concentration camps, prison of war camps, where everyone would lose weight. But the majority of people, if they hadn't become too unwell while they were in those camps, so they hadn't got diseases that actually stopped them being able to eat or absorb food, would return to the weight that they were before. So calorie restriction is really the key to weight loss. The problem is that when we have calorie restriction, our body thinks we're hungry, and it does adapt to starvation. So when you reduce what you eat in your diet, the body thinks, oh, I'm starving. So it does a number of things. One is it subtly lowers your body temperature, and we use a lot of calories just by keeping warm. And even a small reduction in our body temperature, 0.5 degree centigrade, saves quite a lot of calories. And the body is not, our bowels are not passive in a sense. So if we are low in something, when we eat it, we're more likely to absorb that relative to what else we've eaten. So if when we're losing weight because we're on a lower calorie diet, our body thinks, help, I'm starving, got to cool down. Subconsciously, you'll want to move less, but it absorbs a greater proportion of the food you've eaten to try and get back to that steady state where it's at. And that's why losing weight isn't easy. And unfortunately, it involves It involves eating less. It's trying to eat foods that fill you up, that don't have calories. It's being careful about having any calories in your liquid. Whenever you feel hungry, drinking first. Again, the caveat to that is people who have kidney disease and maybe on a restricted fluid diet, they can't do that. So there will always be individuals who will have to have a slightly different version, but the key to weight loss, unfortunately, is reduced calorie intake.
So when do we take into account a body type? The way a person digests the food, their genetics, their enzymes, does it diet or doesn't it? What one person eats, another person is going to gain weight with. Yeah. You know who's giving me this question.
There's been quite a lot of work looking at people's genetics, because some people lose weight easily by cutting out carbohydrates. Others, it's fat and protein that they have to reduce. So in others, it's right across all the foodstuffs. So there is quite a lot of variation, and sometimes it's trial and error as to what you do. Things like Lighter Life, Cambridge diet, they generally work well. The downside is they're quite expensive. So I'm always reluctant to recommend people go down that route, just because it's boring food. It's milkshakes that come, and it has its prices. But you're absolutely right. What works for one person doesn't always work for the next person.
So the next question is, if mesh is dangerous, especially in high BMI diabetic patients, is a common question from a candidate hernia repair. How do you address those concerns?
Yeah, I'm not sure weight itself is that mesh is dangerous in the obese. It's the consequences of being overweight. So if you're diabetic with not so good diabetic controls, you run higher blood sugars, you're more likely to have that thicker scar as you cut through the skin and subcutaneous tissue. That leads to what we call a dead space, where fluid gathers. And when you have fluid gathered in the body, sooner or later it will get infected. So being overweight, particularly if you're overweight and diabetic, these are all risk factors for infection. And then the problem with mesh is it's a foreign material. So it's exactly the same as a heart valve or a joint replacement or a cataract eye lens replacement. They are foreign material. And once it gets infected, the body can often struggle to treat that infection. Even with antibiotics, the bugs will reduce in number. The patient seems to get better. You stop the antibiotics, and then the infection comes back again. So that's kind of where the danger is. The problem is, obviously, in patients who are overweight, the forces on their abdominal wall are a bit higher. And therefore, just suturing them back together again means that they're more likely to fail compared to someone of normal weight having a suture repair. So mesh is even more important in this group, in a sense, with recurrence of the hernia as the endpoint. So there's no easy answer. Clearly, the more weight a patient can lose prior to surgery, the better. The fitter they can before surgery, the better. And the better that any disease they have is well managed, the better their outcome will be. Having said that, you can have someone of normal weight who's fit and well and fit, who can still have a disastrous outcome. So life's a balance, but you can sometimes be a bit more lucky if you can improve your physical and health conditions prior to surgery.
Okay, so thank you. I don't think we've got any more questions for now. So I think, to recap, the message tonight is that it's not just for you to make the operation easy for surgeons, it's for our own health and to make the repair better, and for a longer lasting repair, that we lose weight. Any weight that we can lose is a bonus, but it is a journey. It isn't going to happen overnight, and we do need support. We have a brochure that will be published shortly. Hakan is going to do that in the group now, and we need to say thank you very much to Andrew for writing the brochure, and to Sonia and Matthias and the European Hernia Society for the work in creating the brochure. It is a really good one. I will try and read it. It is helpful. You will find it helpful. Small gains, that's what it is all about for me. Set yourself a small target. Don't think I've got to lose 3 or 4 stone all at once, go for 3 or 4 pounds, and then the next 3 or 4 pounds, and the 3 or 4 pounds after that, and they all soon add up. And have that support. Try and move a little bit, get off the bus 1 step sooner, 1 stop before you would do. It all helps. Maybe a trip around the park. Exercise is a really good feel factor, and it can help with the depression and the stress and the anxiety. Just doing that movement and being outside can help if possible. So do we have any further questions?
Yeah, I think you're right, Jackie. It is a package. And as I said at the start, it's sleep patterns, it's stress. These sometimes are not easy to remove, but it's trying to be focused. I often tell my patients, you know, this is for you. You have to be selfish. The family's going to have to revolve around you for a period of time. You know, they're going to have to stop making you stressed, stop you being up half the night. And they've got to help you with your food choices. They've got to help you move if you're unsteady on your feet or need help. And then the bottom line is often say, you know, if you lose some weight, it's easier for me to do your operation. If it's easier for me, it's safer for you. Yeah. The majority of people, the difficulty is the majority of people who are overweight will sail through their operation and be fine. But when it starts to go wrong, it can end up being months of difficult wound management, suction pumps, staying in every day for the district nurse to come and change dressings. The potential loss, if it goes wrong, is terrible. And that's why it's worth putting in that effort to try and minimize the risk of it happening.
And once you get going on this pathway, it becomes a way of life. It becomes a whole lifestyle change. So the longer you can stick with it, in a way, the easier it does get for you.
And often, you know, families will tend to eat the same thing. And a lot of couples, families all report weight loss because they've all started to eat the same things. They've eaten off smaller plates. They've made the changes together. Yeah. There's no sweet drawer or naughty drawer or whatever. Because if it's not there, it's much harder to eat it. You know, if you want a chocolate bar, but you have to walk half a mile to the shop, well, you probably can walk half a mile to the shop and get it. But if it's in the drawer, you put your hand in and you eat it very quickly. And we're all guilty of that. I don't wish to be pointing a finger at anyone. It's what we do.
Yeah. And don't ever go shopping when you're hungry.
Yeah.
Never shop. Take a list, make a list, and don't go shopping when you're hungry. That's my...
Well, if you do, buy a litre of water, sit on the park bench and drink it
before you
go shopping.
Okay. All right, then. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. And if you have any questions, then we are available on the Facebook group. Yeah. Take care.
Thanks for the invite, Jackie. And I hope
thank you so much
for everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye now. Bye.